guys, what is going on? Rush here, and welcome back to an episode of Cards and Castles, where today, no need to kind of jump around the actual topic at hand here when there is a patch to discuss. Um, patch has dropped a few days ago, I believe. We haven't seen one since December, so certainly good to see an update. And overall, it's been an update that, from what I've understood, has been quite a positively received one. Not a whole lot of negativity coming out of this update, which is good to see. Pretty healthy patch is certainly a welcome patch. We actually haven't really received a patch, I believe, since December, if my mind is correct on that. I could be wrong. It could have been sooner, but maybe I'm just not remembering a small one in between. And there is a lot of things to discuss about, some big nerfs, some big buffs, and a lot of minor things in between here. So we are going to discuss some of my biggest takeaways from the patch. May not be your biggest takeaways, but things that I felt were important to kind of talk about from this patch, some more than others. It has been a couple days since the patch has gone live too, so certainly some things have settled down. I haven't been able to keep up with the Cards and Castles scene though, so in that time, some of my information may not be wrong. I had a lot of notes written out beforehand, before I kind of went away, so there are some things here that might not seem totally accurate, but hopefully, I mean, these are kind of my, again, first impressions, my biggest takeaways. They might be different from what we're currently seeing in the game. Some might line up, but it's on. We'll see as the patch kind of further solidifies itself down the line here. Um, you know, going down, as time passes, I should say. That might be the better term here. So, with that being said, no need to kind of jump around any further. Let's go ahead and talk about the patch, starting with the first kind of biggest rework here, and we'll jump to that right now. So first up we're actually going to hold on, before I jump into this, we are going to start on the more of the quote-unquote nerf side of things, just so that way we'll get the bad stuff out of the way first and then move into the good stuff. Although, honestly, I don't really see Fenrir as being much of a nerf, more as a rework. Probably the most anticipated change in this patch, the tweak to both price and attack was a much-needed one for Fenrir. With the mid-game in Druids formally including Beastmaster Call for Aid, and adding Fenrir on top of that, it was certainly needed that one of them needed to be kind of pulled away from the rest. The adjustment to 7 gold puts it in a pretty good late game spot, being the only card in Druids to be in that gold position, and not only furthering itself from the mid game, but also keeps it out of conflict with cards like Leanna and Pack of Wolves, which we see, in the 8 and 9 gold range. I guess not respectively. It would be Leanna 9, Pack of Wolves 8, but you kind of see my point there. Additionally, with the attack buff, it works to help Fenrir make more of an impact in his new gold position. Having 5 attack will most likely mean he can remove more threats off of spawn than he did when he had his 3 attack. Plus, having the same ability where he can grow in attack, that kind of being at 5 attack, I should say, he can grow in power faster having the extra attack from his base stats. As for how this affects various decks that utilize him and his play, Fenrir is still an amazing card mechanic-wise, and the tweaks seen here will likely have little impact in where he thrives the most, that being the Pirate Druid mid-game. Sure, he might be coming out slightly later in a matchup, but with tools like Ramp and Scope in that arsenal of Pirates, it's safe to say that they'll be running Fenrir continually, not really having that much an effect. However, we also could see a swap from having 3 copies in a deck to 2, with a lot of other decks may not be Pirate Druid specifically, but decks that still kind of run Fenrir using that Druids, we will probably see a reduce from 3 to 2. Again, it goes for all decks that kind of run him, not just the mid range. 7 gold is still a hefty price to pay. 7 gold is still a hefty price to play, and with no buff to his health, tactics that were used to remove him previously will most likely carry over and do the job just as well. So we may see decks adjust to that threat by lowering their copy to 2 rather than 3, potentially. Just a kind of potential out there. With that being said, though, this was a great and much needed change to Fenrir, and one that I still think we're going to see, well, at least one that won't kill off Fenrir completely, and we'll still see him hopefully thrive where he is kind of shine the most, or where he has shined the most, I should say. Following that is the Defective Flame Cannon, probably the biggest nerf to come out of this patch. The change to Defective Flame Cannon decreases the power behind one of the most widely used burn spells in the current burn spells in the current format. Previously, Flame Cannon was able to be used, as the most reliable removal for high-value targets like range units, including Acolyte and Tarius, as well as various buildings. The buildings being the most prevalent out of those 2 targets. However, now the Flame Cannon can only do 2 damage and not 3. it loses the ability to be a reliable burn for those targets, and with buildings still going to be a big part of decks moving forward, decks using Flame Cannon will no longer have that safety net of 3 damage directly from hand. So in terms of play moving forward, it's safe to say that decks will completely wipe Flame Cannon from their list in favor of new safety nets to combat buildings and range units. We'll probably be seeing, Blue Fire Bolt and Arc Fire rise as contenders to Flame Cannon spot, since both can do up to 4 damage and target both units and buildings. Now, I just kind of want to touch up on Arc Fire really quickly, because I do note that Arc Fire is sort of one of those cards that, you might be thinking to yourself, well, it's not always a 4 guaranteed damage, but with the continual, well, I guess with the steady increase, I should say, of range units and more likely mages like Wizard, Darkbender, etc., and maybe even Cultists moving forward. There is some talk about Azalian Cultists potentially seeing some increase in play. So, potentially having all those contenders in decks, Arcfire does kind of fit its way nicely into that, into where Defective Flame Cannon used to be. Considering that now you do have mages to back up running it, it can do 4 damage. So, and it is cheaper at that point too. So having 4 damage for 2 gold is certainly big there. But overall, a pretty hefty nerf to a once popular burn spell in the Defective Flame Cannon. Next up is Priest. The biggest buff to come out of this patch, the former Hassan Missionary, has certainly got one hell of an upgrade. Being reworked in stats, ability, and even name, you can certainly expect to see Priest in nearly every Crusader deck moving forward. Of course, we all know the importance of stats in this current format, so being placed at 3-2 should certainly be no surprise there as to why that's good. Having the crucial 3 attack will put it on par with other popular choices like Miner and Elvish Thief, but it's not only the stats that will be sort of the sole reason behind the rise of Priest. His new initiative ability of giving all allied units +1 boost, a +1 boost to their health, is a great bonus to complement Priest's new design. Again, we've seen the importance of global buffs, so to speak. So in a sense, Priest can be seen as I wouldn't say global buff. It's more like how do I put this? It's not a global buff because it's sort of like an initiative, so it's not continual. I'm going to put it in quotes as a quote global buff for now. We'll see how that goes sort of moving forward. But it's sort of a global buff without the continual buff, I guess. Instead, just a one-time ability, as we've seen there with the initiative. This would be great, though, for Crusader decks moving forward. Again, those that put emphasis on units or swarms, since they can all get a minor boost once Priest pops out on the board. In summary, Priest has become a unit where you can play him and see nearly no downside in doing so, which is a great way to further diversify the early game moving forward. So, overall, a great rework to Priest, and one that should, again, see some more diversity thrown up in our wonderful early game scene. I almost said mid-game. Wonderful early game scene. Next up is First Strike. Now, First Strike or at least another group of cards that were in need of a change. The improvements to First Strike cards, namely in Ronin and Demon Hunter, are some that can make First Strike a little bit more of a legitimate threat. Previously, both of these cards, specifically Ronin and Demon Hunter, suffered from having less than stellar stats. Ronin at 2-3, Demon Hunter at 4-4. And on top of that, there were many ways to get rid of them very easily, whether they be in sort of big units, or at least in the form of bigger units, or, some minor spells, like Burn, Defective Flame Cannon, Dagger Storm, Blue Firebolt, etc., what have you. Although now with these buffs, you'll find that these First Strike units, in particular Demon Hunter and Ronin again, will be slightly harder to remove. Even more so with the nerf to Flame Cannon added on in there. Having that no longer as a threat to any of these cards. You'll still see cards like Blue Fire and Arc Fire be able to take these cards down very easily, as well as if you have a very big, large unit on the board, they'll be able to crush these guys. However, these changes on their own are not going to make a huge impact for First Strike decks, in my opinion. True, there may be an increase in them with the support of Woten, which has also been recently buffed, so some people kind of throwing around Woten First Strike decks in there. So you're starting to see a small uptick in that. But I feel like, in my opinion, the changes to First Strike are going to be felt more on the Awakened side of things, not really the First Strike side of things. Of course, Demon Hunter won't really be seen in here when we're talking about Awakening, but Ronin will certainly add another layer onto Awakening decks that have already seen, or at least that already have a bunch of good things going for them, like Mass Burn and Big Golems. Plus, Dire Badger recently got buffed, and people are receiving that quite well too. So Awakening, in my opinion, got a huge buff from this, and again, First Strike just adding on top of that gives them a much more solid place rather than having them as their own deck doing their own thing. First Strike is probably going to be seen more now as support to Awakening, which will be huge. Of course, not really taking away from the fact that First Strike decks still exist, of course. They can, of course, still do their own thing, but I feel like First Strike will be more successful as it's, an ability being put alongside Awaken. So overall, though, these minor buffs can certainly help bring more legitimacy towards an overlooked group of units. Of course, that is true, but you'll probably see this more of an impact in the Awakening side of things. Not so much the First Strike of things, but still a change that I felt should have been talked about nonetheless. Next up is Acolyte. Now, another seemingly minor change. Acolyte is one that I think may be overlooked by many, but should not be taken too lightly. We previously discussed the impact that a small health buff can bring to a unit, and coupling that with the loss of Flame Cannon, of course, going back to First Strike, how Ronin 2-4, a little bit more interesting now with that. So think about adding that onto Acolyte. And we now have a moment here where it can appear that a formerly overlooked unit can now have this time to shine. This being a prime example. With how easily Acolyte has been shut down in the past, it's no surprise that a change like this can be overlooked. However, now that we have 4 HP on Acolyte, a number that we previously discussed being tricky to remove directly with a spell that isn't hard removal, we may be seeing more of Acolyte, especially since we've already seen the impact of range units like Wizard and Darkbender. Toss up the fact that Acolyte can continually spawn zombies too, and now you have a mobile spawner that's going to be a little difficult to remove. Now, I am aware that Steel Witch, of course, exists, and she can spawn 2 skeletons, but her fragile stats of 1-1 means pretty much anything can get rid of her directly, including the weakened Flame Cannon that we previously discussed, and even Flame period for that matter. So, it makes sense why a 1-4 that can spawn things may be slightly more menacing. Sure, it can only spawn 1 per attack, but there is a good chance that it could be attacking more. And with that, we can see why Acolyte's change is a kind of pretty interesting one. Next up is going to be Wraith. Now, before we talk about Wraith, I should probably preface that what I'm concerned about with this tweak doesn't really have to do so much with Wraith itself, but with where he can be found. We all know that the Wraith makes up 1/3 of the undead pool alongside Banshee and Headless Horseman, where he can be pulled from cards like Mordok and Keeper of the Doorway. And with the latest tweak to Wraith's attack, this will most likely make the undead pool the nastiest pool in the current game. With Wraith given 3 attack rather than 2, it would mean that every card in that pool can at least deal 3 damage, and that's a big, and that's big. When cards like Mordok can directly summon and use them on the board, it would give Mordok more power and more of a reason to be used in nearly every deck to provide some sort of building removal or overall threat. So while this change may not directly impact Wraith as a solo card, if you will, it will definitely give strength to a pool that honestly doesn't really need it at this time, and that's why the tweak to Wraith is a slightly concerning one, and one that should not be kind of overlooked. Sort of like with Acolyte, the minor stat changes can be big when looking at the overall, larger picture, and Wraith, again, another prime example of that. Next up is going to be obstacles, or what I like to categorize things like Pillar, Lava Font in the obstacle category. So now it's no surprise that we obviously see obstacles on another set of patch notes, as they're always being looked at and worked on to see how they can gain some power. And while I don't think that they will get a big boost out of our latest changes, they are worth quickly noting, or at least talking about for a brief moment here. With cards like Font and Pillar seeing health numbers at 8 and 7 respectively, you can certainly expect to see some players trying to incorporate these elements into maybe some kind of rush deck or even a wins deck to create an early threat. Font, especially seeing how 8 HP and the 2 gold range is pretty big, that's something that will certainly pique some minor interest just to see what they can do with that. It certainly won't have a heavy impact in the competitive scene, but the health numbers obstacles currently have, which is the point I feel where it's necessary, or at least I feel it was necessary to make a quick note of. So obviously, Font and Pillar seeing some big numbers. There are some talks about incorporating them into kind of some rush decks, but of course, those are really in the minds, or at least the mouths, of players who are kind of just experimenting, the ones who always like to kind of see what else there is out there. Again, not really much of a competitive impact, I feel like, but something that I should make note of here, considering that now Lava Font for 2 gold, you have a thing that has 8 health. So pretty interesting when you look at it from that perspective. And one of our final cards we are going to talk about here is Dragon Training. Usually the most ridiculed card amongst the Dragon archetype, Dragon Training gaining the ability to draw is a welcome change to the card. Being able to draw for an additional Drake is a neat way to give this card the help it so desperately needs. However, I'm pretty confident that this really won't do any sort of drastic shifts in Dragon play because of this. I did want to bring it up in the video though as a reminder to those of you who want to use it, that it does not reduce the cost of any dragons such as Aeroth, Dramoth, or Yenaroth. only Drakes like Faithful Drake or Ice Drake. Regardless, it's a good reinforcement to the card, but I don't think that it will make a major impact overall. Just kind of wanted to make a note of it here. There's really not much that I can really throw onto this card. It's kind of already pretty ridiculed, and I don't think Dragon Training is going to be seeing much of a boost because of this. But again, did kind of want to throw it out there. It is an interesting point now that Dragon Training does draw a card, so not only Dragon's getting this sort of like welcome change to the card, but you also get a little bit of a draw support in the form of Dragon Training. So again, interesting to kind of take note of here, but again, nothing again that has a serious impact overall. With that being said, folks, that's going to do it for this patch video. Now I know it might have been kind of brief in your eyes. Maybe didn't get to talk about everything that you wanted to. I certainly have some honorable mentions here that I did want to talk about that I thought definitely benefited from this patch, but didn't really have any room for me to talk just yet. Cards like Shoden, King Kaiju, Joan VF, Kargrum, all kind of contenders that I'm watching to see how their impact kind of shapes as we progress forward into this patch up here. But yes, I do know that the patch video itself here was pretty short. And again, these are just my opinions on the biggest takeaways from it. I do have some plans later on, hopefully, to get maybe more people on the channel here and have a bigger patch discussion where we can, of course, break down some of the changes that you might not have had heard on this particular video, or maybe even further breaking down some of the changes that I did mention on this video. We'll see. I do want to, well, that'll be something I'm probably going to get together behind the scenes. Maybe you'll see that up in the coming weeks or so. Definitely before July ends, maybe, if that's becoming a thing. But again, only time will tell if that is becoming a thing, I should say. I guess there's no really other way to phrase it. But with that being said, a quick note before I leave the video here, or at least before I kind of wrap things up. I do, or at least I am aware that I don't follow up with the tier list very often. I don't think my tier list is actually very updated at all. And of course, tier lists constantly change when we see, format shifts or deck shifts or stuff like that. They're always kind of updating constantly. So if you guys want to see how this patch impacted a tier list, or at least how certain cards rank now because of this patch in sort of a tier list form, I'm going to leave a link to an Excel spreadsheet down in the comments below. It's of course one giant tier list made by some of our players in the community. You can kind of check out how they rank some of the cards after patch, or at least after this patch, and of course all the cards for that matter in general. Of course, the players who made this are some of our top ranking players too, not just anyone really who made this list. Some of our, of course, stars. Jump, who of course formerly #1 for the June season. I'm not sure how he was doing now. I haven't checked the rankings in a bit, but of course, a former #1 player did contribute to this tier list. So definitely have a look if you guys are interested in how these patches have shaken up cards in forms of a tier list, and if you want to kind of get a wider perspective on how a tier list kind of formed here after this patch. Again, link to that Excel spreadsheet down in the comment section below. But with that being said, guys, I hope you did enjoy this video. If you did, be sure to leave a like, share this video, and of course comment down below your thoughts on how you thought this July patch impacted decks that you play, or what do you guys think about this patch overall? Was it good? Was it bad? Again, tell me in the comment section below. And while you're down there, if you haven't already done so, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Show your support by clicking the subscribe button at no additional cost to you. And with that being said, guys, that's it for me for now. So, until next time, stay gaming.